June 6, 1944, 04:30 H-hours. The Normandy coast lay under a low gray sky, its calm deceptive, its silence temporary. Across the channel, the greatest armada ever assembled was already in motion. Steel hulls cut through black water, engines droned, orders were whispered, then repeated. There would be no recall. At his headquarters in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt did not need to see the ships to understand what this morning meant. He had lived through 2 world wars. He knew the sound of inevitability. Defense, he believed, was not about victory. It was about endurance, about surviving long enough for the enemy to exhaust himself, or for politics to intervene. This morning offered no such illusion. Across the channel, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had already made his decision. Hours earlier, he had released the invasion with a simple order. The pressure he had spent months assembling, men, fuel, ships, air power, was finally unleashed. Not for a single blow, but for a campaign designed never to pause. The German Atlantic Wall, stretching from Norway to the Bay of Biscay, had been built to repel an assault like this. Concrete bunkers, minefields, artillery. Yet Rundstedt knew what the maps did not show. Static defenses could delay. They could bleed an attacker. They could never defeat an enemy whose strength increased with every passing day. For Eisenhower, time was a weapon. Every hour the Allies held a beachhead, more divisions would land. Every day, air superiority would tighten. Every week, German options would narrow. The invasion was not a gamble, it was an accumulation. Rundstedt understood this logic with grim clarity. The longer the war continued in the West, the weaker Germany became. Fuel shortages, trained reserves exhausted, command decisions constrained by ideology rather than reality. Delay was the only currency left. As dawn approached, the first Allied shells fell. The coast erupted in fire. History crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. The contest was no longer about stopping the invasion. It was about how long defeat could be postponed. The invasion of Normandy did not surprise the German command. What surprised them was its scale and its refusal to slow. In the months before June 1944, Rundstedt had argued relentlessly with Berlin. Germany, he warned, could not defend every coastline. The Atlantic Wall was a symbol, not a solution. The real battle would be decided by mobile reserves, by armored divisions held back to strike the landing force before it could consolidate. But those reserves were shackled by indecision and pride. Adolf Hitler refused to yield control. The armored divisions were split, some placed near the coast, others held inland. All required personal authorization to move. In a war where hours decided outcomes, authority was centralized in a single mind that slept late and distrusted his generals. Rundstedt had seen this before. In 1918, Germany had delayed reality until collapse made decisions meaningless. He understood that wars were not lost in moments of drama, but in weeks of attrition masked as hope. Across the channel, Eisenhower faced a different problem. He commanded a coalition bound by necessity rather than unity. British caution clashed with American urgency. Canadian forces demanded recognition. Political leaders watched every move. Failure would not merely lose a battle, it would fracture the alliance. To manage this, Eisenhower built pressure deliberately. The Allied air campaign intensified. Rail yards across France were bombed relentlessly. Bridges vanished. German divisions moved at night, then not at all. Every bomb dropped before the invasion was a silent infantryman waiting offshore. When the landings began, the coordination was brutal in its precision. Naval gunfire, tactical air support, engineers clearing obstacles under fire. Losses were severe, particularly on Omaha Beach, but the system absorbed them. Units were replaced, timetables adjusted. The machine continued forward. Rundstedt watched reports arrive with growing alarm. Beachheads held, then expanded, then linked. Requests to withdraw to more defensible lines were denied. Hitler demanded counterattacks that no longer had the strength to succeed. One German commander, Erwin Rommel, had warned that the invasion must be crushed on the beaches or not at all. He was absent on June 6, visiting his wife in Germany. When he returned, the window had already closed. Rundstedt now faced the truth he had anticipated. Germany was not losing because of a single mistake, but because it could no longer dictate the rhythm of the war. Every German move was reactive. Every Allied move added weight. By late June, over 850,000 Allied troops were ashore. More than 150,000 vehicles followed. Artificial harbors, mulberries, rose from the sea itself. What had been impossible on paper now functioned under fire. Delay had bought nothing. The longer the front held, the worse it became. German units were ground down, replaced by formations with fewer men and less fuel. Allied divisions rotated, refit, and returned stronger. Rundstedt understood the equation. Time favored only one side. On July 1st, he and Rommel jointly appealed for strategic withdrawal. The answer was refusal. Berlin demanded faith. Rundstedt had none left. On July 2, 1944, Gerd von Rundstedt was dismissed. The order arrived without ceremony, no consultation, no debate. After nearly 5 decades of service, Germany's most senior field marshal in the West was removed for stating what the leadership refused to hear: the war could not be won. Delay was no longer a strategy, it was self-deception. He was replaced by Günther von Kluge, a loyalist burdened with an impossible task: hold Normandy, repel an enemy that grew stronger by the hour. Do so without freedom of maneuver, without air cover, and without the authority to retreat. The defense of France had become a test of obedience, not competence. For Eisenhower, July marked escalation, not consolidation. Operation Cobra was prepared with mathematical brutality. Allied bombers, over 3,000 aircraft, were concentrated against a narrow section of the German line near St. Lo. The goal was not subtlety, it was a rupture. On July 25th, the sky itself collapsed. Bombs tore through German positions, annihilating communications and morale alike. The breakthrough was immediate. American armor surged through the gap. German divisions disintegrated. What had been a static front became a race, one side advancing, the other unraveling. Every mile gained accelerated the next. Eisenhower's strategy revealed its full logic. Sustained coordination did not seek decisive moments. It created conditions where collapse became unavoidable. German command traffic turned frantic. Orders contradicted each other. Counterattacks were demanded, then aborted. Units reported strengths that existed only on paper. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks that had survived the bombs. Rundstedt, now sidelined, watched from a distance as his prediction unfolded with mechanical certainty. The delay had failed because the Allies did not pause. There was no operational breathing space, no diplomatic opening, no exhaustion. The Allies never stopped adding strength. By early August, the German 7th Army was trapped near Falaise. Tens of thousands of soldiers were encircled, the roads choked with wreckage, destroyed vehicles, abandoned artillery, dead horses. Allied aircraft hunted relentlessly, turning retreat into a massacre. An estimated 50,000 German troops were killed or captured in the pocket. Equipment losses were catastrophic. What escaped was shattered beyond immediate repair. Von Kluge, implicated in the July 20 plot against Hitler, was recalled to Berlin. He would take his own life en route. The Western Front ceased to exist as a coherent defensive line. Paris rose in revolt on August 19th. Allied forces entered the city 5 days later. France was effectively lost. Eisenhower did not celebrate. His cables remained focused on logistics, rotation, and momentum. Victory, he knew, was not declared, it was maintained. For Germany, the West was gone. For Rundstedt, the war he had tried to delay had now reached its irreversible phase. By September 1944, the Western Front had transformed from a defensive campaign into a retreat measured in hours. What remained of German strength in the West no longer fought for terrain, but for coherence. Units marched without maps. Orders arrived too late to matter. The war had shifted from command to consequence. Rundstedt was recalled briefly, not to restore control, but to lend legitimacy to collapse. The decision revealed the truth Berlin could no longer disguise. Authority had become symbolic. The field marshal returned to a front where strategy had narrowed to choosing which losses to accept first. The Allies, by contrast, moved with institutional calm. Ports were reopened, supply lines extended, divisions rotated. Losses were replaced not with improvisation, but with schedules. Eisenhower's system absorbed friction because it had been built to expect it. Weather delays, fuel shortages, tactical reverses, none altered the direction of movement. The machine slowed, adjusted, and continued. This difference defined the final months of the campaign. German commanders requested withdrawals to shorten lines. The answer was refusal. Every retreat was framed as betrayal. Every lost town is a failure of will. Ideology replaced analysis. The war became moralized, then immobilized. In December, one last gamble was authorized, a counteroffensive through the Ardennes, an attempt to fracture Allied unity and force negotiation. It was not conceived from strength, but from desperation. Fuel reserves were calculated to the last barrel. Surprise was the only remaining asset. For a moment, it worked. American lines bent. Snow covered the forests. Confusion spread. But even here, Eisenhower's advantage reasserted itself. The Allies did not panic. They redistributed pressure. Air power returned when the skies cleared. German spearheads outran their supply. Delay returned, but this time it worked against those who needed it most. The offense stalled. What remained of German armor was consumed. What remained of German credibility vanished with it. The war returned to its prior trajectory, now accelerated. Rundstedt understood the final irony. Germany had attempted to win time through shock. Eisenhower had won by denying time's value altogether. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, resistance became local, fragmented, and symbolic. Cities fell without battle. Bridges were taken intact. The end approached not with drama, but with administrative inevitability. When surrender came in May, it felt less like a conclusion than a confirmation. Rundstedt would later describe the Western campaign with a soldier's restraint. There was no bitterness, only clarity. Wars, he believed, were not decided by brilliance in crisis, but by the structure that preceded it. Germany had attempted to survive defeat. Allies had planned to make survival irrelevant. The difference was not courage, it was continuity. The Western campaign of 1944 was not remembered for a single battle, nor a single commander's genius. It endured because it revealed a transformation in how wars were decided. Gerd von Rundstedt belonged to an older tradition. He believed history bent toward exhaustion, that even the strongest offensives would eventually fracture under their own weight. Delay, in his mind, was not cowardice, but realism. It was how empires outlasted storms they could not stop. Dwight D. Eisenhower represented something new. He did not seek to defeat Germany by brilliance or audacity alone. He sought to overwhelm the very concept of recovery. Every plan assumed losses. Every timetable assumed friction. Strength was not conserved for decisive moments. It was constantly applied, constantly renewed. The system mattered more than the man. This was why the defense failed. Germany fought the war as a sequence of crises. The Allies fought it as a process. One side reacted, the other accumulated. Each German delay merely widened the imbalance. Each Allied pause was temporary, calculated, and compensated. Rundstedt understood this long before Berlin admitted it. His tragedy was not miscalculation, but irrelevance. He saw the future arriving and could do nothing to stop it. Strategy had outgrown the assumptions of his generation. When the war ended, Europe lay divided not by battlefield lines, but by systems. The Western Allies emerged with logistics, coordination, and institutional command as the new currency of power. The age of improvisational generalship receded. The age of managed war began. Normandy was not simply an invasion. It was the moment when time itself changed sides. What Eisenhower built was not pressure for a day or a season. It was pressure without release. Pressure that transformed resistance into attrition, and attrition into collapse. Once set in motion, it could not be undone. Rundstedt believed that wars could be survived. Eisenhower proved they could be engineered to end. This was not merely the fall of German control in the West. It was the end of an era in warfare, one where delay could substitute for victory, and endurance could replace adaptation. After 1944, that illusion was gone.